Hello! Thanks for coming back. If you're coming back, my name is Isis and this is Isis Says Hi. I like to do a lot of research videos on topics that matter to me or just do random rambles about politics and other things because that is my life. So if you like any of those things, please feel free to subscribe, and if you like the video while you're watching, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. So I was actually going to talk about the Hatch Act. It's pretty easy to summarize. Essentially, if you are a federal employee, including those who were appointed by the president, you are not allowed to be partisan while you are in your official position. That can kind of change. I don't think cabinet secretaries, like outside of their position, aren't allowed, but like if you're in the CIA or the FBI, you can't be visibly partisan in any way, but you can still privately like vote and stuff like that. But that's kind of what I was able to find. I know a lot of people keep saying that, I'm assuming it's when President Trump decided to deliver his speech from the White House, that was kind of violating the Hatch Act. I don't know, like the way that people kept trying to use the Hatch Act in that way. As far as my research has been shown, the president and the vice president, they're exempt. Let's get into the video. I want to do this because obviously I am a Christian. Ain't she fun? I tried my best to make it a little bit more simpler and easier to understand, but philosophy always is weirdly complicated and complex. There's also math. Like when I was taught philosophy when I was like 10, 11, he was like doing these math problems. I never knew that philosophy had math. It's also why I never ever wanted to take a philosophy class, because I don't want to do math. And like the math that he was doing, I was like, what? Anyways, let's move on. So I'm gonna mostly be talking about this from a Christian/Protestant lens. I'm gonna try my best to make sure that it isn't just from that lens. In simple terms, deconstruction happens when a person asks questions that lead to the careful undoing of their previous beliefs. Deconstruction can also be an approach to understanding the relationship between text and meaning. Some talk about a mid-faith crisis, where deeply held principles are re-examined and sometimes chucked in favor of more progressive ideas. The dilemma for those experiencing a shift in their faith is often figuring out which of their beliefs are true and good and which are false and harmful. The period of questioning can be painful and often isolating, as Christians are sometimes afraid to voice their doubts or admit to a change of theology. And this doesn't only have to mean Christians, of course, it can mean other people of other faiths. Cole Morton argues that this is a particular problem in evangelical churches, which he says are not set up to explore the questions of life, but rather provide their perceived answers. Deconstruction is different from deconversion, which can mean the process of no longer identifying as belonging to your religious faith. Deconstruction doesn't have a definite end result. It doesn't. I got lost. Sorry. It's a deeply personal journey that is messy with a tendency towards vagueness. It involves questioning and confronting theology, which has traditionally been defined for us as a reflection of God, who is not only masculine, but also hierarchical and absolute. I like to say conditional. So God is only our God based on these conditions. I feel like people deconstruct and reconstruct their faith to include marginalized voices that they have seen have been discriminated against or silenced. So now they're trying to kind of reconstruct their faith to be way more inclusive than it was originally taught to them. Deconstruction was both created and influenced by the French philosopher Jacques Derrida. I'm so sorry in advance, I still don't know how to pronounce it. Who coined the term deconstruction, argues that in Western culture, people tend to think and express their thoughts in terms of binary oppositions, white, black, or masculine, feminine. Derrida suggests these oppositions are hierarchical, containing one term that Western culture views as positive and another considered negative. Through deconstruction, Derrida aims to erase the boundary between binary oppositions and to do so in a way that we question why those oppositions exist. These observations have inspired a range of topics and subjects in social sciences, including the disciplines of law, anthropology, linguistics, psychoanalysis, LGBT studies, and feminism. The French philosopher Paul Ricoeur explains deconstruction as, when we're reading something, there is a first innocence, which is taking it as it is. Then there is a movement towards critical distance, where you step back from the test. What in God's green earth? Maybe I should do my videos earlier. Then there's a movement towards critical distance, where you step back from the text and ask questions. Then there's a second innocence, where you reconnect. Deconstruction comes from Heidegger's, he's German, use of the word destruction. It was borrowed from Latin to express a concept their creators perceived as new to the philosophical domain. Heidegger's concept of destruction is closely related to the Latin word abau, or dismantling. The purpose of destruction is to arrive at those ancient experiences in which we achieved our first ways of determining the nature of being, the ways which have guided us ever since. This goal separates destruction from deconstruction, but because it has no fixed endpoint or goal. Deconstruction is always an ongoing process, because the constantly shifting nature of language means that no final meaning or interpretation of a text is possible. In the late Rachel Held Evans books, Inspired, she talks about how when reading the Bible, it has to be read in the time of when the story was happening for us to truly understand what it means, and even then, we might not be fully capturing its meaning. So that's kind of what Derrida is saying. Derrida insists that what he deconstructs are texts that he loves, using deconstruction to reveal their complexities and contradictions. Deconstruction allows those who are usually marginalized or looked down upon within the religious tradition to find the flaws that their oppressors seek to hide. What deconstruction reveals, among other things, is that repression, or hiding, is necessary for creating a story to explain things that we cannot control. This is why canonical texts, like I'm assuming the Bible, offer the most productive grounds for deconstruction because of its change in language and meaning throughout time. Derrida claimed that all of his essays were attempts to define what it is, and deconstruction is complicated and difficult to explain because it actively criticizes the language that is needed to explain it. Derrida states that deconstruction is not a method and cannot be transformed into one. He avoids calling it a method because it assumes that there's a procedure to deconstruction when there really isn't. As far as I've been able to do the research, it looks like they call it postmodern theology, so that's kind of what I'm gonna go by. Rob Bell made the proclamation, "Will only a few select people make it to heaven, and will billions and billions burn forever in hell?" Which, yeah, that's literally what I also thought. As an introduction to his book, Love Wins. Some thought he was calling out the theological elephant in the room. For others, the question Bell was asking was off limits. The rise of social media and podcasting has since allowed Christians who are questioning religion to gain a following and express views that their local church leaders might frown upon. And I listen to some of them, and I'm really grateful that they exist. Postmodern theologians observe that interpreters who have beliefs and biases cannot interpret texts objectively, which is true. Postmodern theologians propose abandoning the ways we were taught to read our religious texts, and in their place, they recommend reading scripture through a new, multi-dimensional view. This entails engaging in open-ended conversation with the biblical material, being suspicious of the text, deconstructing inherent power structures in texts, instead listening to marginalized voices. So essentially, scrapping what we've been taught and do it in a way that's a bit more inclusive. Let me get a little bit of some queer and trans folks in the mix. Let me get some more people of color in the mix. Let me get some women in the mix. That's what that essentially means, and I completely and wholeheartedly agree. Also, there's like a good chunk of LGBTQ plus instances in the Bible that just glossed over. Just want to point that out. Anyways, most postmodern theologians have three key themes: an embrace of mystery, an emphasis on journey, and a stress on conversation and dialogue. This is not a practice that has never existed, and you can also see it all the time in the Bible, but for some reason, I know what the reason is. Particularly in evangelical churches, that's kind of been taught to just be ignored, which obviously isn't fair. People have questions, people deserve to be included. We should be having those discussions because they're important, and to not have them because it might shake that notion that you need to have an answer to everything, it's kind of dumb.